Center. She has convened various workshops and conferences and committees, and she has authored and edited more than 80 books so far. Her publications are more than 80, and she has authored and co-edited around 8 books. I would like to mention some of them. They are Cultures of the India and Beyond, 2014, Standing by the Wayside, 2014, Restoring the Indigenous and the Popular Imaginary, Volume 3, 2017, Spiritual Ecology and Sustainability, Practice and Confluence, 2017. She had co-edited this. And the recent one that she has co-edited with one of our colleagues, Nidhi Madan, that is Revisiting American Literature, which has come out in 2018. So I think we have just the right person here with us to, the topic that we have, American literature, context and contours. So the best person we can have here to take us along the trajectory of the contours.
I was just wondering what is happening. This is an earlier recording of mine. Yeah, this is the Delhi University College. I think it was CVS where I spoke about American literature.
I got some other information about you, that you were specialized in American literature. It is also my field too.
Yeah, I know that.
Just a day back, I have filled for faculty profile, you may say, online data of my university. And you were asking, what's your specialization? I never write about my specialization, but this time you have to mention, because something they are doing with their online data. So I found that you are there as per my partner in the American Literature Contemporary partner. Welcome, ma'am. She's our Professor Joya Chakravarty. Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening, Jayshree. Good evening, Professor Srivastav. How are you?
Good evening, Professor Joya. It's a pleasure to be here among friends. Jayshree is a very old and dear friend of mine. Our association goes back at least 20 years.
Great. You see, Jayshree is also a very, very hard-working student of mine. And she'll compel you to work equally hard. मुझे तो ये भी नहीं समझ में आता है ये खाना कब खाती है कब सोती है.
I agree with you. I agree with you.
All goes credit to our, the NCC officers, army officers. They used to train us like military, women.
You see, my area of specialization in MA was American literature. And I loved Arthur Miller. I don't know why I felt that Arthur Miller was very good in opposing Aristotle's theories.
My God, lovely. And of course, when you teach the tragedy of a common man, the Arthur Miller's essay, you really need to have a very thorough understanding of Aristotle poetics. Otherwise, you will not be able to deliver the actual sense of Arthur Miller's new meaning given to the common hero. Right, ma'am, can I take 2 minutes to just do the formalities of introducing my university and everything, if you don't mind?
Please go ahead.
Okay. I'll just share the brochure of the university so that we can all see, and our attendees whosoever have joined, they can also look to the brochure. Sometimes they get, lazy to read each and every detail that is given in the brochure. So both the things simultaneously would go on. So I'll take 2 minutes, Dr. Prem Srivastava. Dear friends, scholars, esteemed learned fraternity of academia, my heartiest welcome and good evening to all of you. It's a pleasure to receive you all for gracing this virtual faculty development as attendees. The host of this almost 18 days workshop is Department of English, Faculty of Humanities, Bhupal Nobles University, Udaipur, Rajasthan State, India. This program is dedicated and committed to the 100 years, that is, centenary celebration of the big family tree called as Bhupal Nobles Sansthan, that is run by the trust Vidya Pracharni Sabha, whose chief patron is the current existing His Majesty the Maharana Mahendra Singh of Mewar state in Udaipur main city, and his son, the respected Kanwar Yuvraj Vishwaraj Singh of Mewar. Then our current bearers of this Vidya Pracharni Sabha that looks after into every background development of this the educational units. I acknowledge on their behalf their blessings and permission, and I would like to just pay my gratitude to the chairperson of Vidya Pracharni Sabha, Shriman Pradeep Kumar Singh Ji Singoli, and the secretary of Vidya Pracharni, Dr. Professor Mahinder Singh Agria, and the finance secretary of this same trust, Dr. Professor Daryav Singh Chundawat, who had been formerly head of commerce and the dean of commerce too, from Mohanlal Sukhadia University. Then I also extend my gratitude to the managing director of Bhopal Nobles Sansthan, Shriman Mohabbat Singh Rathore. Now, the contemporary office executives of Bhopal Nobles University are Professor Dr. Naresh Bahadur Singh, the Honorable President of Bhopal Nobles University, and the Honorable Registrar Shriman Parbat Singh Ji Rathore Sahab. So all the academic research and the UGC, whatever the rules that has been given to us, that be looked after by these two main executives of Bhopal Nobles University. I sincerely welcome their kind gesture and cooperation. I also greet and welcome the learned, respected Dean of Faculty of Social Science and Humanities, Dr. Devendra Singh Sisodia, and my fellow dear literary colleagues of my department, the host organizer, because I'm Dr. Jayshree Singh, now contemporary head, and my other predecessor as the head was Dr. Aparna Sharma, then Dr. Madhvi Rathore, and Dr. Manisha Shekhawat. So there are 3 associate professors in our department and 1 assistant professor. With in-depth gratitude, I greet the external member of the Board of Studies of English Department of Bhopal Nobles University. And he's extremely my real-life support mentor, esteemed Professor Sharad Srivastav, and his dear wife, Dr. Nidhi Srivastav. I extend my a lot of again my gratitude and tribute to the veteran contributors, to the host English department, and especially Professor Dr. Arun Zakaria. Now I invite our Professor Joya Chakravarty. She is formerly the head of the Rajasthan University Department of English, then the Dean of Faculty of Humanities, and also the chairperson of the same University of College of Arts. And she had been a very versatile and active personality as an administrator, looking after other departments as Dean of Education and the Social Welfare, etc. To her credit, we have a lot of UGC projects as well as literary works. She has expertise in critical creative research and criticism. Then our honorable, the Professor Prem Kumari Srivastav. She has aligned with our university as a resource person for today's lecture. She belongs to Maharaja Agrasen College, Constituent College of Delhi University. She had, to her credit, I just read through her, biodata available on the Google Net, and I found that she has, to her credit, around 8 or 10 books well written by herself, and then other kind of newsletters, journals, And the most popular contribution that is going on to her credit is her journal titled as Foretell. This journal basically publishes language studies, research articles. Sometimes she often also require submission with regard to literary analysis and creative writings, etc. I hope you can see her on the screen. Can you all see her screen? Ma'am, just wait.
Yes. Yeah, I
Yeah.
can see.
Yeah,
Hmm.
she's here. She's Prem Kumari Srivastav, a professor of English uh, with University of Delhi at Maharaja Singh College, with several publications, 10 books authored and edited, many research papers, book chapters, review articles, translations, and creative writing. So here I welcome my dear Professor Kumari Srivastava without taking any less time. And I request our Professor Honorable Chair Jaya ma'am to later on take up the panel for critical comments. May I
Okay.
invite Professor Prem Kumari Srivastava?
Thank you so much, Dr. Jayshree. It gives me great pleasure to be speaking at this English Literature Language Studies workshop organized by your department at the Bhupal Nobles University Udaipur, Rajasthan. It was a pleasure for me to meet online Professor Joya. I've heard about her, and it was an absolute pleasure to hear her, to see her warm smile and to hear her. Thank you, Dr. Jayshree, for inviting me and for making me part of this interesting workshop. As I mentioned, association with Dr. Jayshree and friendship with her goes a long way, way back to it, more than 20 years. Very fond memories. Many thanks for this invitation, Dr. Jayshree. I particularly enjoy the word creative in the title of this workshop. Creative language teaching criticism, films and texts. And I would like to play upon this and problematize it a little more. I understand that I'm addressing a gathering of accomplished faculty members from across the country who are much aware of the current educational climate in our country and across the globe. Now, recent trends in negotiating pedagogy are indeed challenging. Contemporary students are more knowledge savvy and equipped with search engines that we are not even remotely familiar with. Recent trends at the workplace and on the employment register are also very competitive and risk driven. Thus, the task of the pedagogue, but like you and me, is to be creative by bringing in experiential learning to the classroom, particularly in order to be and to remain topical and relevant. Now, others, unfortunately, will not survive in this new climate of the postmodernism, post colonial, post liberalization, post humanism, post cosmopolitanism, post globalization. Now, globalization had offered us a duality. On the one hand, as the global mesh expands, local cultural forms succumb and lose their specificities. On the other, since globalization works by co opting the local, by adjusting them to the global idiom, the local actually finds a presence in and through it. This is actually the thematic of my talk. Now, this results in glocalization, and I'm borrowing from Roland Robertson, the creation and incorporation of locality, resulting in a certain kind of cosmopolitanism. This has happened also on the lit cinema adaptive register. Say in the case of Shakespeare's adaptations by Vishal Bharadwaj in Haidar, Onkara, Makbul, we have all seen that a new local cultural counter has been created. So, as is clear, globalization homogenizes and fragments at the same time. It can lead to standardization of cultures and yet result in unleashing the power of the local and the indigenous all at the same time. And if I may say, it creates a huge cosmopolitan mess. So, with these prefatory remarks, I wish to talk about an issue that is indeed topical, relevant, and worthy of serious consideration, both at the national and international levels, which happen to be the thematics of this particular workshop, too, and particularly, in all departments of language, literature, sociology, cultural studies, and on registers that are both colonial and post colonial. Now, let me talk about the sharing that I'm going to do with all of you. I'm going to present this in two parts. In the first part, I will try and provide a theoretical context. Now, this could be a little tiresome. None of us are really interested in theory, but theory is very important to provide a background and a context, right? So, I will try and provide, as I said, a theoretical context to literature and cinema. And in the second part of my talk, which is a little more meaty, right, I present a glimpse of resistance spaces. It was very difficult for me to really pick and choose what to present in this 1.5 hour session. And I chose resistance spaces that have the power to alter, both from literature and cinema. That is going to be the second part of my talk. Now, unwrapping the traditional trappings and formalities of conservative academics, recent decades have witnessed charged debates on the contested landscape of literature. A paradigm shift has been noticed, whereby a text has been placed against various production apparatuses or other modes of representations: cinema, stage, television, comic books. So, if literature has to fulfill its role, and I think several of us here are from literature departments, so if literature has to fulfill its roles and purposes and be a communicative practice, its analysis, particularly of fiction, can provide a crucial link between literature and culture. And here comes in cinema. Cinema is one of the dominant technologically progressive modes of cultural transmission, has positioned itself as integral to the development of the culture of sense and meaning in modern society. And uh, as mass public culture, art, and vehicle of propaganda. And if we go back to the Frankfurt intellectuals, from Horkheimer to Adorno, one would just about understand that literary adaptations on celluloid and cinema create an extended narrative for the audience. Thus, questions like what happens to literature and cinema, and can pedagogy remain unaffected by its representations in cinema, gain greater relevance today. Now, as transmitters of the dominant ideology, the classic examples, and I've just picked up just a few random examples, are, say, Ian Fleming's James Bond spy thrillers, furthering the myth of the white man as the savior of the human race, and also Bond as the iconic hero out to protect humanity from evil. Generally, evil is either Russia or Germany. Remember these texts, all post Cold War texts, as the case may be. Even Agatha Christie, the queen of crime, creates a discourse around the enigmatic Hercule Poirot, the detective, to paint a social landscape fraught with tensions and distrust, put up in a series of formulaic manipulative texts. However, when literature flows into other forms of popular culture, for example, films, soap operas, comic books, subversions of a different kind happens. Inventions take place in the form of violence and sex. Contrarily, many distortions also happen. Silences on philosophical and moral issues of the text also changes its structure. When Agatha Christie is captured in cinema, her entire work is represented by just one character, that is Pyro. Similarly, and take you to the blockbuster of the 1936, that is Gone with the Wind. Vivian Leigh and Clark Gable, the two iconic film stars of that time who also won the Oscars. Vivian Leigh and Clark Gable immortalized the characters of Scarlet and Red Butler. We can continue with endless examples. Nonetheless, by offering another mode of critical inquiry in the form of films or soap opera, the modern world has forced us to relook at the definition of the literary canon. And I'm not really going to, because today's discussion is not about canon and high and low, cultures. But yes, there has been a relook at the definition of the literary canon, and cinema studies has done that. Now, one can agree with Leslie Fiedler, the famous American culturalist, that, and this is very important, literature is never just words on the page, but is primordial images of archetypes and myths that can pass out again easily into any other medium. They can be portrayed on stage. They can be painted. They can be sculpted in stone. They can be turned into stained glass windows. They can be carved into stone, into soap. They can be made into cinema. Right. So one can estimate easily, and it's an estimate claim that 30% of the movies today derive from novels, and that 80% of the books classified as bestsellers have been adapted to cinema. So, friends, young friends here, my contemporaries here, I'm just trying to provide a bit of a background, a landscape, which soon I am going to unravel by giving you a couple of experiential examples, real life examples of what happens to literature in cinema. Right. So, it is pertinent for us to study why cinema is important, why literature matters, and what both have to offer a cultural period in which boundaries are being continually redrawn. Thus, often it is a story of what matters more. There's this constant debate, constant kind of a conflict. What matters more, literature or cinema? And in this story of appropriation, translation, revivalism, and reinvention, a new story is also being written. It is a story of survival, albeit in morphed forms. We all know that today, when we reach a classroom and when we talk to our students and when we ask about a certain novel being read, several hands are raised. And these hands tell us that they have not read the novel, but they've watched its adaptation in cinema. Right. We have all experienced that in our classrooms. Right. So it is a story of survival. And media and the digital boom has given a new life to literary cultures, particularly, as I said, in the classroom. And cinema has, and I firmly believe in this, that cinema has become a kind of exciting pedagogical tool, both for teachers and for learners. So it is also my firm belief, and I need to congratulate the team of this workshop, that the driving force of the topic, according to me, is a postmodernist, liberal, cosmopolitan, global impulse of today's century. And I'm so happy for that, right? So I'll quickly, kind of take up two central debates that are related to literatures and literature's adaptation into cinema. The question of hierarchy, that what matters. And the second is, how loyal is the adaptation, the fidelity discourse. And for that, I think a kind of a laying of the groundwork is very important, a bit of a theoretical groundwork. And here is this groundwork. And I'll just quickly, kind of go through this groundwork. It was in 1957 that the first book length study on film adaptation of literature came out, and this was by George Bluestone. Novels into film, the metamorphosis of fiction into cinema, and his study is based on the assumption that literature and film are, and remember, this is like, for us today, it's like 70 years back, right? That literature and films are intrinsically incompatible. And he defines the two media as two ways of seeing. And his study essentially focuses on revealing the ways in which these are secretly hostile to each other. Now, we have traveled a lot since this time, but I thought it was very important for me to bring this to you. This George Bluestone study. Now, around 20 years later, 1975, George Wagner, one of the pioneers in the study of film adaptation, he talks about three types of adaptation and he calls them transposition, commentary, and analogy. I don't think I need a greater explication of this. One is absolutely familiar with what is transposition, what is commentary, what is analogy. And finally, a kind of in continuation to this, Michael Klein and Gillian Parker in 1981 also identified three approaches to the study of adaptation. Quickly, of course, there were other French critics like Jean Maitreyi, who very interestingly says that a novel is a narrative that organizes itself into a world, which is very interesting. And a film is a world that is organizing itself into a narrative. So John Ellis in 1982
Please,
picks up,
could you just repeat that again? I'm
yeah,
sorry. Yeah, the
yeah,
novel
this
that
is Jean Maitreyi, who's a French critic, and he's a product of the 20th century. He died in 1988, and he says that a novel is a narrative that organizes itself into a world. And a film is a world that is organizing itself into a narrative. And the same thread, the same idea is beautifully qualified by some of our contemporary critics. And I'll just come to that just a little later, right? So
yeah, thank
now
you.
Ellis, in 1982, brings a slightly more additional, kind of concept to this, literature cinema dynamics. John Ellis says that an adaptation trades upon the memory of a novel. And the filmmaker is not just a translator, but also an author. So, greater autonomy is now being given to a filmmaker, and greater autonomy is being given to a film, which is even when it's based on a literary text. Now, a very significant study of the latter part of the 20th century was by Joy Goyd Boyum, 1989, who brought out a seminal book called Double Exposure. Now, Boyum had a lot to say. She says, film is a poorer cousin of the novel. The film often violates the integrity of the text. And she says that in assessing an adaptation, we never are comparing a film with a book, but an interpretation with an interpretation. We, as readers of literature, if we could say as scholars of literature, or at least humble scholars of literature, we know that every little text is an interpretation, right? So this was very, very interesting. And this was furthered by Corrigan in 1992, who said that there is a mutual belongingness between literature and cinema. So, the main point that I'm making is that, right at the beginning with Bluestone and Wagner, when these two were considered as different silos, today we are reaching a position where we know that that cinema beautifully, kind of qualifies a text. And I think I have my personal favorites. I have my favorites. For example, some of you might have might have, of course, read Jhumpa Lahiri's Namesake and seen Meera Nair's film also by the same namesake. Now, of course, one is very fond of Jhumpa Lahiri's, and of course, her book of stories, The Interpreter of Maladies, is of course very, very, good and really worthy of the prize that it got. But Namesake is also a great novel. But what I enjoyed more was the film. Meera and I did a wonderful job with the film. So point is that we've reached a time when there is a mutual belongingness between literature and cinema. Now, I will just quickly move on to Kenneth Pellow, who again talks of the film as a critical commentary of the text, to come to the contemporary scholarship from critics such as Sumati Ramaswamy, Linda Hutchin, and Robert Stam. And Linda Hutchin absolutely is fantastic. She's written a lot on adaptation studies and her theory of adaptation. She's also part of the journal, and some of you might be familiar with this journal, which is called Borrowers and Lenders. It is about, and there are several issues of Shakespeare's adaptations, plays adaptations into cinema from all across the world. And we are familiar with the very, very famous, Throne of Blood, by Akira of Japan. And of course, our dear Vishal Bharadwaj, who has done a great job with Shakespeare's adaptations. So, this contemporary scholarship talks of things like what is cinema doing to literature, that it's practicing intertextuality, says that a text should be placed against other production apparatuses, multidisciplinarity and interactivity, that it provides. It also questions the primacy of a written text. After all, why a primacy is given to a written text the way orality or oral literature does? And we all know that there is this huge debate when we talk of the indigenous traditions and oral and orature and oral literature. There's always, this debate on why the primacy to the written text. It also questions form. For example, a novel or a play, just as a comic book or a graphic text, such as Bhimaina does, it questions static form. It also celebrates fluidity of mediums. Now, this contemporary scholarship of Sumati and Linda and Robert Stam, they also critique the fidelity discourse. Remember, I spoke about two very, very important issues related to literature and cinema. One was the question of hierarchy. What matters more, literature or cinema? And the other is critiquing the fidelity discourse. How loyal is, if there is an adaptation, after all, how loyal is that adaptation? Now, according to Linda Hutchin, all art is adaptive. She says that the transpositioning and refunctioning is as old as art itself. And that adaptation is, and I think this is a very important statement that she makes, that adaptation is not parasitic. It is rather a fundamental operation of the storytelling imagination. It thrives on recognition and remembrance. It does not have to be seen as derivative and unfaithful to the adapted text. Now, Robert Stamp takes it still further. He calls film a multi track medium, which can play not only with words, but also with theatrical performance, with music, with sound effects, and moving photographic images. And he gives another very interesting example, that a novel can be written on napkins in a prison, but a film assumes a complex material infrastructure. It needs a camera, film stock, labs, simply in order to exist. And the third important critic was also, a contemporary critic, is also Thomas Leach. Now, Thomas Leach says that adaptation theorists should focus more on how adaptations play with and around their source text rather than merely how they ape them. So, with this kind of background, theoretical background, I am soon going to come to some important vignettes that I bring to you from literature and cinema. And the issues that require deep scrutiny are: what happens to literature and cinema? What are the losses and gains? Medium is the message, said by Marshall McLuhan. How relevant is this in this age of technology? Textual script versus film script. What happens to that? What are the role of film shots, long, short, camera angles, light, location, setting, cultural transfers? And if we go by James Monaco, what is the language of film? How to read a film vis-a-vis a written text? And how to handle reservations about cinema, which are, example, encroachment of visual culture upon the traditional culture of literacy, distortion, imitation, making a literary text impure, or the debate of classic becoming popular, as cinema is an important element of the popular culture of a nation. So these are important questions which constantly, bother us when we are dealing with literature and cinema. Now I come to the second part of my talk, which is resistant spaces in both literature and cinema. And now I would like to share a small presentation with you, which has these vignettes. Just allow me that bit of time. Jayshree, am I a co-host here? Hello? Hello?
Yes, Dr. Srivastava, you can share yourself
I,
also.
I can share, okay,
There
right?
is an arrow raising upward. Can you see
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah,
arrow
yeah,
raising?
yeah, yeah. Okay, I'm
Click,
presenting. Right, right.
click it. Ah. And if
Okay.
your file is open in the bar, you can,
Yeah, I will do that. Yes. Hmm.
yeah, we can see. It's visual.
Right, right, right. I'm just coming to my presentation. Yes. Can you see, friends? Can you see
We
my
are
presentation?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
lot of
Right.
attendees.
Hmm. So we are actually talking about when literature moves on to newer spaces, right? Okay, and when we enjoy not just reading, when we enjoy seeing too, right? Okay, this is my first vignette from literature. You don't take that land, we say, we yell, we holler at the men in black flowing robes and curly white wigs. It's our land, always was, always will be. It's our land, but they don't listen. Listen to equality, don't listen to truth, to human rights, to land rights. Don't listen to a law, and they take our land and they graze it and mine it and fuck it up forever. Bastards. This is a poem by Barbara Nicholson, an Aboriginal poet from Australia. Let's look at the second. First, the Diku came as land grabbers, the British colonizers as Dikus who ruled us. Now we have these big industries and these townships. Thus, from individuals, the Dikus have taken the form of massive industries and industrialists, and today in the form of development projects that destroy and make us their victims. This is from the manifesto of the Jharkhandis Organization for Human Rights, 1999. And I come to the third. Christopher Columbus, where have you been? Christopher Columbus, you are the most successful real estate agent who ever lived. Sold acres and acres of myth, a house built on stills. Beneath the burden of 15,000 years, my tribe celebrated this country's 200th birthday by refusing to speak English, and we'll honor the 50th anniversary of your invasion, the 500th anniversary of your invasion, Columbus, by driving blindfolded cross country, naming the first tree we destroy, America. This is a poem, Postcards to Columbus by Sherman Alexie. Sherman Alexie happens to be a Native American, an American Indian poet who's still living and still writing in America. Right. So, as I said, it was very difficult for me to choose a kind of a broad and expansive landscape, but a curtailed landscape to talk about, and to present to you something in literature and cinema. So here are resistance spaces, as I said, in literature and cinema. The first was the outcry against grabbing of land, which is so sacred to the indigene, right? It was from Australia. The second was, as I said, a story of a similar history of dispossession, deprivation, and exploitation, which was reflected in the manifesto of the Jharkhandis Organization for Human Rights. And the third, as I said, it was, from a Native American poet whose poetry was the most direct admission of what happens when one's right to exist and his nation is decimated by a population of white settlers. It was his poem, Postcards to Columbus. Now, friends, this was, as I said, just a brief intro to what I am going to talk to you about in the second part of my talk. Now, this is about articulations that matter. Now, these are spaces which are sites of trauma, of loss. These are spaces that are undermined. They are rendered inconspicuous in the collective consciousness of of the nations over centuries. These are footnoted, never really spoken in the main text. These are spaces that need to be excavated and reclaimed. And I think by now, several of you would know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about natives. I'm talking about aboriginals. I'm talking about Janjati studies. I'm talking about tribal literature. I'm talking about the indigenous spaces. I'm talking of the Adivasi, the First Nations of Canada, the Native American Indians of America, the original inhabitants, the first peoples. Now, in the Orientalist Edward Said's quintessential center margin paradigm, these are the people who stand at the margins. Now, in A.K. Ramanujan's prognosis of the Marg and the Desi traditions, which again several of you would know, these are little traditions. And these little traditions focus on orality, orature, oral literature. They rest on the fulcrum of ancient India's, and in the case of Indian tribal literature, on India's Shruti and Smriti traditions. They believe in the power of the sacred with a deep sense of connect with their surroundings and environment. They worship the sun, moon, Mother Earth, the animals, the ancients, the ancestors. They have a deep spiritual ecological consciousness. They practice spiritual ecology. Storytelling is their art, and they are profound storytellers. And folklore and folk tales have also been a part of their social and cultural setup. And if I can still go on, their worldview is ecocentric rather than ours, which is anthropocentric. They're ethically very strong people who believe in life cycle myths and superstition, some would say. In short, these are rooted, grounded, and people who are connected with land, leading to a simple lifestyle. Now, why are we today and why is cinema today? We are doing literature and cinema, right? So, what is the reason? Why is it that today, in the last 2, 3 decades, are we talking of these studies, these cultures? The reason, as I said, for the rise of these studies are certain common concerns arising, as I said, out of the contemporary culture of the post liberalization, post cosmopolitanism, post globalization, with the onset of globalization. I spoke about this right at the outset. transglocalization, a kind of a renewed humanism, a kind of a dismantling of hierarchies, a disbanding of categories, and a new neo avant-garde movement that would demystify the stereotypes. Right. Now, this kind of a climate has led to a desire primarily from the marginal sites. And remember, I've already invoked the center margin paradigm of Edward Said, right? So, the emerging out of marginal sites, an idea to de-emphasize the colonial past, to re-emphasize, the margins in their own way, to lay bare common historical, social, and political issues, to deterritorialize studies. I think that's very important because, for long they've been put in reserves and silos, to uncover ethnic contexts and to excavate and demuseumize them. And friends, let me tell you, for long we have been museumizing these cultures. In Delhi, the Delhi Heart is one example of how you museumize their cultures. We all know the in on authentic tribal material and stuff that is sold there. We know that it's not coming from Andaman and Nicobar and Jharkhand and other places. We know that it's all produced here in the bylanes of Delhi, but you tend to so the need is to demuseumize these cultures, right? Now, what are these contexts, native contexts, aboriginal context, because that is the final part of my talk, because I'm going to deal with this cinema, right? So what are the aboriginal or the native contexts, as I said, of this kind of a culture? It's museumized, it's nowhere yet everywhere. We all know how masks are sold. We all know the cowboy cult of the West, they are nowhere yet everywhere. They are shunned, they are displaced, they are history pieces only taught in books and showcased in libraries. They face issues of adjustment, and we know that, in our universities, we know there's a whole lot of, student community coming from these tribal belts, and how much of and the kind of issues that they face, issues related to food, about environment, and all that they face when they come to bigger cities. So issues related to adjustment, they actually become hybrids, right? And half breeds, in many ways, and inhabitants of the metaphorical no man's land. In short, within the margins, at the margins of the margins, stand the native, right? Now I am talking about these unequal yet resistant spaces, and performance allows the concept of cultural transfer, which enhances the resistant ethos of this narrative and culture. So, and performance, and I'm basically going to talk about cinema. So, it is true that today most texts are read, broadcast, and performed to both retell and question these theories and frameworks. Texts are performative, constantly contested, and in a dynamic process of remaking. So, with this, I aim to look at the way how performance of a text transforms and translates meaning from page to screen, and how cinema becomes a performative, resistant space. Right. Now, what is crucial about this cinema? It is a fight for survival. Now, with this, I bring to you three again examples, three powerful voices from cinema, and I think I do have additional 15 minutes to kind of talk about these three examples. The first is from India.
Please go ahead. We are really enjoying your talk. Please go
Thank you
ahead.
so much. Thank you so much. This first example, it's a small clip that I'm going to show to you. It is from a film called Gangor, which is based on Ma Shweta Devi's story. The clip that I'm going to show you is in Italian because it was made into an Italian film but with Indian actors. Let me first show the clip and then we can talk about it.
Il documentarista Italo Spinelli
Can you
affronta
hear
in
it?
Bangor un tema delicato e purtroppo ancora attuale in molti paesi del mondo, la condizione della donna, la sua sottomissione e la mancanza di diritti. Per far ciò costruisce una pellicola che mescola sguardo occidentale e placidità orientale. La stampa non dà nessuno spazio alla storia di queste donne.
Io sto cercando l'India invisibile, quella che non fa notizia. E qual è il tuo nome? Sai cosa dicono delle tue foto?
Quando uno spregiudicato fotoreporter indiano, impegnato in un reportage sulle donne della Purulia, regione del Bengalo occidentale, fotografa la bellissima Gangor mentre allatta al seno il figlio, non è in grado di prevedere la reazione che l'immagine discinta della donna sul giornale scatenerà negli abitanti del villaggio. La denuncia della condizione della donna tribale è un urlo che lacera il contesto esotico e la curiosità di stampo quasi antropologico con cui il protagonista della storia si accosta al mondo in cui Gangor vive. Purtroppo, la seconda parte della pellicola perde di vigore dal momento in cui a questo sguardo curioso, ma esterno, si sovrappone il dramma vero e proprio.
Now, this was, of course, I'm so sorry I couldn't find a clip which had in English subtitles, though I do have the full film, which has English subtitles. But this film, Gangor, is a unique reconstruction and resistance which is found in the adaptation of the story, which is called Gangor by Mashweta Devi, but it is also called, has a subtitle which is called Choli Ke Piche. And in English, it's been translated as Behind the Bodice. It is from Mashweta Devi's Breast Stories. Many of you would be familiar with this renowned Kolkata based Bengali activist and writer from India who absolutely needs no introduction. What is interesting is that the adaptation of the story was by Italo Spinelli, an Italian documentary filmmaker and director of the Asiatica Filmedale Festival in Rome. The setting of this Italian-Indian co-production, Gangor, now this was released in 2011, is West Bengal, where the largest number of India's tribal villages are concentrated. With a setting and story entirely Indian, the actors Indian and of Indian descent, and the language mostly English, the film unravels a story, and the story also does, the original story also does, a story of gender violence, subjugation, and apathy towards the double subaltern, the tribal women. The narrative moves around the subjectivities and body posturing of a migrant tribal woman, Gangor. And you might have just been able to pick a bit of the idea and the thread from this little clip that I showed. So it is, as I said, about the migrant tribal woman Gangor and the fascination of this photojournalist from Kolkata. His name is Upin Puri, who's sent to this village Purulia to cover a story on the exploitation of tribals and his fascination with her beautiful status breasts. Fascinated with Gangor's breasts, Upin clicks pictures of her while she's feeding her child that later appear in the newspaper in an article written by him in Kolkata. Now, Ma Shweta Devi's breast stories showcase women's bodies, their breasts in particular, as sites of subjugation and resistance, oppression, and subsequent reclamation of agency in an ironic way. They uncover a larger debate about the Adivasi woman, a double subaltern, and her, now this is important, and her spokenness. Now, behind the borders unfolds the tragedy at the global intersection of hegemonic influences emanating from Western media when photojournalist Upin, as I said, travels to Purulia to photograph tribal exploitation. He snaps a shot of the breastfeeding young mother Gangor, who works on a piece wage basis in the kilns of light bricks and tiles. Upin's frozen image exposes not only the Western gaze of the exotic, natural woman's sexuality from India, but media construction of the breast as a commercial site of patriarchal fetishization and fascination. Now, Devi writes in her story, this woman's body is a curse. Yet, and if some of you might have just read her other stories, her female characters such as Jashoda in Standaini and Draupadi in Draupadi and Gangor, even though constituted by patriarchal ideology, are strong and upright with an agency that is very much their own. And this agency comes out towards the end. And friends, I would just like to quickly tell you a little more of this story, that once these photographs come out in the newspaper, the whole lot of media from Kolkata, they descend on Purulia. And unfortunately for Gangor, now she has nowhere to go because she becomes a subject of, male gaze. The police of the Purulia district and others exploit her terribly. Upin, the journalist, is not able to get over this woman, and he comes back again. And it is here the woman's agency is, kind of reflected. And, Ma Shweta Devi, in a characteristic style, does this towards the end, like Draupadi, a victim of gang rape in another story, who refuses to wash herself and walks naked towards the Sena Nayak. Gangor here too, also towards the end of the story, tells Upin, you are a bastard too, sir. You took photos of my chest. Ah, I'll show you. I'll take everything from your pocket. And then Gangor takes off her choli and throws it at Upin. Look, look, look. Straw, shafts, rags. Look what's there. And Devi then writes, no breasts, two dry scars, wrinkled skin, quite flat. And then the song, now this is the movie, of course, but in the story also, the song plays, Choli ke piche. And remember that song, the very famous Madhuri Dixit song, Choli ke piche kya hai, Choli ke. Upin is absolutely horrified, when he sees that spectacle of, and now let me just reveal to you, everybody, that these breasts are now cut, right? So Upin is horrified at this spectacle. He runs out of that juggi in which, he goes to meet Gangor, and he dies on the railway tracks. So, of course, my submission on this is it's just going to come now. Now, in this case, of course, the sex subaltern, has spoken her mind. But the film is also a critique on unethical journalism, and it underscores and makes that a valuable point. So, I'm trying to also in some way tell you all about this relationship between literature and cinema. Now, Ma Shweta Devi's art is born out of anger and frustration. Now, this anger and frustration is a mere shadow in its cinematic adaptation. Now, this is what is important, when literature and cinema mate. Sometimes this is what happens. And that is why these debates constantly continue, that what matters more, literature or cinema. But I don't think these debates are important. As she says, Mashweta says, not only do I use dialects, I also use words from the living language wherever necessary. Now, in the case of the cinematic cultural transfer and the fact that the text is an autotelic text, the one that is cinema just about reads the other. And in debates over adaptations of literature in cinema and why literature still matters, the story by Mashweta triumphs. Often cinematic adaptations tend to overpower the print. And I strongly feel this to be the case of Jhumpa Lahiri's namesake. The film triumphed, but in this case, the story triumphs. You know, the cultural transfer could never really happen in this Italian adaptation. Often, as I said, and so therefore, in this present case study, it is the obverse. In many ways, the subaltern writer of the written word has spoken just a little louder. So, this was one example that I really wanted to share with you, which come from, the margins and speak of the margins. Now, Jayshree, if I have time, I would like to bring to you one more example. It is 7:15. So can I
Yes, you have at least 7 minutes more. Seven
okay, so
minutes.
I will quickly show you one more, you know, uh, clip, and I'm going to take you to Canada now and to the First Nations communities there. Yeah,
Ma'am, your this MS document screen need to be
I
removed.
am
Yeah.
doing
No,
that.
it's
Yeah.
okay. It's fine
Yes.
now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's fine.
Watching Callum go from being Callum to Norman is terrifying.
Crazy bitch. I didn't want to complicate it by
Can you
creating
hear?
an interesting character. I was seeking
Yes, we
more
can hear.
uh, an empty person.
He brings, even in his menacingness, a kind of bizarre, sympathetic, seemingly boyish kind of charm to the role, which makes it unnerving.
You drink that, I'll give you $20. Nice drink. It's a drinking game. Come on. For me to be healthy, I disconnect from it a lot, and in moments I trip right out and fall into some crazy place. When I'm done, I don't think about it at all. And I actually don't think how the scene went. I don't think about did we get what we wanted. I can't wait till it's over. Truly, I love the people. I love working with them. But to come to work every day, going, I'm gonna rape this chick. Now I'm a pedophile. Now it's not a great place to be. And my girlfriend was in town for a little while, and there I am reading books about severed heads and asking her crazy questions, and she just, can you stay away from me?
Right. So, as I said, I'm going to now take you to Canada and just a very, very quick background to what I've shown. Now, this is a film which is called Unnatural and Accidental. It is based on a play by Mary Clements. Mary Clements, who happens to be a First Nations author. Now, I need to tell you that First Nations are the locals, the original inhabitants of Canada. They're called the First Nations, just as we have the tribals and the Adivasis in our country. So now in Canada, before the advent of Europeans, primarily the French and the English around the 15th century, it was local Inuits that inhabited the region. In 1759, when Britain gained full control, but American Revolution disturbed it. Some wanted to join America, others were happy to align with the Queen, but generally by the 19th century there was the Anglophone and the Francophone Canada, and 6 aboriginal cultures are today identified as First Nations cultures. Let me quickly just give you the Mi'kmaq, the Métis, the Mohawks, the Anishinaabe, the Cree, the Okanagan, and of course some others are, as I said, Cherokee, Hansley, and many others. Now here is Now, this, the clip that I've showed you, is actually an adaptation of a Metis playwright, Mary Clement's play, The Unnatural and the Accidental Women. It was a 1997 play which was adapted by Carl Basai in, I think, 2006, if I'm not mistaken. Right. It focuses on serial killings of native women in Vancouver, downtown East Side between 1965 and 87. Right. The women were killed by alcohol poisoning, but all reported in the press to be unnatural and accidental. So the play is a site for struggle. It critiques state apathy to racial and gendered violence and celebrates the women as life affirming and interconnected even after death. Now, the storyline goes something like this, and I'll quickly let you know. Rebecca is a woman in her early 30s of Aboriginal heritage, living in Vancouver. Here, crime, drugs, and prostitution are common, and many Native Canadian women have been caught in this downward spiral of self destruction. Now, Rebecca also looks after her ailing father, and shortly before he dies, he shares a startling news with her that Rebecca's mother, Rita, who was, of course, an Aboriginal woman, whom she had thought long to be dead, is actually still alive and living in downtown Vancouver. Now, shattered by this disclosure, Rebecca desperately wants to reconnect with Rita, and she begins the search. Now, here is Norman. Norman is this serial killer. He's a motor garage owner, and he's a psychotic killer who's obsessed with these beautiful Aboriginal women. Now, as Rebecca looks for Rita, she unwillingly puts herself in Norman's path. Towards the end, of course, egged by the chantings and early native wisdom imparted to her by her mother, Rebecca gains strength to avenge her mother and sisters. Now, I just need to, friends, tell you just a little about. I've, of course, researched. I was a faculty, I was on a faculty exchange program to University of British Columbia, and my research was on Aboriginal cultures, and I happen to have met several. They're all very beautiful. As I just narrated, at the advent of the European colonization, a lot of mixing happened, just as in Europe, just as everywhere, just as in America, the black and the white mixing. Similarly, the non-European and the local. The local were, as I said, is basically the Eskimos, the Inuits, very beautiful women. And the moment this mixing happened, racial mixing happened, most of them were turned out of their clans, their, tribes, and they became half breeds. For anybody who's interested in this, it's very interesting to read Mary Campbell's novel, Half Breed. One can just go and read. Now, this unnatural, and accidental, the play is about these Aboriginal women who have, most of them have been discarded by their families and also by their new family, that is the new European man, German, French, whatever he may be. And they all are residing here, leading a life, a very pathetic life of drug addiction and alcohol addiction and so on and so forth. Right. And this movie is about the serial killer who's obsessed by these women and he kills them. The sad part is that the state apathy is so much that these women's deaths are kind of only notified as unnatural and accidental. And there's nobody who goes after, after a kind of a man or a serial killer. So woven into this dynamic, I'm making a gendered reading, are larger questions of the need for love and family, and to find a space for native values in a violent city. This narrative is a memory narrative, and the true resolution in the end, most of these Aboriginal cultures, people were trappers, right? So there is this almost a spiritual healing that happens towards the end, and the daughter is now able to find her mother, towards the end, and she is able to bring this motor garage killer to, and she is booked by the police finally. So, my concluding statement is that often cinema attempts to undo history by rewriting it. What is crucial about this cinema, and I brought to you a slice from a kind of cinema, a cinema about, the marginals, the natives, to just make a point that what is crucial about the cinema is much more than an artistic expression. It is a fight for survival. And the third example that I had was a wonderful example, maybe another time, another talk. It is about cinema of the indigenous, by the indigenous, and for the indigenous. It is again from Canada, the Fast Runner. It is based on a Canadian legend, but maybe some other time. Now, closer home. Let me come back closer home because I love to do that. Some of you might know the Gujarati indigenous documentary maker. If you've heard of his name, Dakshin Bajrangi, he is making films. He's indigenous. He belongs to the Chara community. It's a denotified tribe. He writes, "My sole intention in making films is to effect change. Where I or my theater cannot reach, my films should be able to reach. And they should be able to sensitize the audience to the voices and the issues of the most marginalized communities." So, with this, friends, I rest my case. Thank you so much.
First, I will invite our Honorable Professor Joya Chakravarty, ma'am, the chair of this panel, to please address not only
Professor
thanks
Prem
and
Srivastava, let me begin by congratulating you. I wish the time hadn't ended so soon and wish we could have seen the third clipping as well. I come from Purulia and I'm
Oh,
familiar with the tribe there. In fact, when Mahashweta Devi had come for the inaugural lecture at the Jaipur Literature Festival a couple of years ago, she told me that in Bengali, that after your retirement, you must go and work in the Tribal Research Institute that she has set up in Purulia. That is my
amazing.
place. Earlier, Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa were one territory. Then they divided, and Bihar further subdivided into Jharkhand. I am familiar with the Diku tribe of Jharkhand because my sister was Chief Secretary Jharkhand. So the things that you referred to brought me back memories of my childhood spent in Jharkhand and in Purulia. And let me tell you that this has been one of the most fascinating lectures that I've heard on why cinema and why text. And you're absolutely correct when you say that cinema often undoes history. Okay, that concluding line of yours. And the stories by Mahashweta Devi with a beautiful analysis on the breast giver by Gayatri Chakravarty Spivak. It's a
Absolutely.
fascinating analysis. That story, the Italian one, I did a course from the Pune Film and Television Institute, and they showed us this picture. Someone asked in the chat box, why is the name Gangor? Please remember, it has nothing to do with the Rajasthan festival of Gangor.
Absolutely.
And it is Gongor. In Bengali, we say Gongor means one who has gone. Okay. And here in Rajasthan, we believe that Gangor is the ending of all festivals, just as Tej is the beginning of all festivals. Jayshree will correct me if I am wrong. Okay.
ma'am, absolutely right.
I really like that sentence of yours. A novel is a narrative that organizes itself into a world, and a film is a world that organizes itself into a narrative. What a wonderful way of analyzing the link between cinema and text. I'm very grateful that Jayshree gave me the opportunity of chairing this session and of hearing you speak. Thank you, Professor Prem Srivastava. I am not going to analyze your talk because in the hierarchical structure, you know more than I know. Thank you so much. The question of hierarchy with which you began. Okay, thank you so much. There is no need to critique the fidelity of your discourse. It is absolutely true and factual because I'm familiar with the areas that you have mentioned. What a pleasure to hear you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Professor Joya. And I'm so glad that I'm seeing you and hearing you. As I said, I've heard about you. Do you know that I'm a Rajasthani myself? Do you know that my childhood, I'm born in Rajasthan, spent my childhood in Rajasthan, and I'm a true Rajasthani at heart. And it's been I'm so happy. I'm so happy that you enjoyed this presentation, and for all your generous comments. You're a senior scholar. Coming from you, it means a lot to me. So I'm glad that there were resonances. You found resonances in what I spoke about, and that the fact that you are in some ways bringing back some things that I said. It shows how kind of how intently you listen to the talk. So I need to really thank Jayshree for inviting me, and for making me a part of this session, and this workshop. Thank you so much, Professor Joya.
I would just like to extend my short token of thanks and gratitude to Professor Joya Chakravarty, ma'am, because as she is senior to Professor Kumari Srivastava. So first I have to address my real heartfelt gratitude to her, that she is really intricately finding the creativity and aesthetics, and how the oppositional aspects has been taken up by Professor Prem Kumari Srivastava. I'm so thankful, Professor Srivastava, that you really deliberated well to our students, to our faculty, to understand, the fine lines with regard to adaptation, transposition, commentary, analogy. I'm so happy, overwhelmed by your paper presentation, and hopefully you will keep yourself connected to our department, and to we are starting to thinking. I think my this mentor, Professor Jaya Chakravarty, suggested me that why not to start with certain creative teaching and criticism through films. So you would be definitely a part of our program. Thank you, ma'am.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Jayshree. I'll be happy to take questions if there are some questions.
Yes, there are questions, because there's Dr. Manisha. She's one of my fellow colleagues. She wanted to ask a question with regard to the short story titled by volume of Mahashweta Devi, Breast Stories. She has raised one question. So let's, Dr. Manisha, can you come on screen to ask the question? Dr. Manisha, are you there? Deepa Agnihotri, are you there?
Hello, this is Pratima Agnihotri.
Yes, welcome, Pratima. Thank you for coming in.
Ma'am, I'm thankful to you for allowing us to listen to such a wonderful presentation. It was indeed a great joy listening to the whole of it. So thank you, Dr. Srivastava. My first question was about Mahashweta Devi, which anyway got answered. Fine. My second question is basically about the film. Film is basically, if we look at it, is a finished product. And when we are looking at resistance, how do we relate it to this concept of film as a finished product? Well, literature sort of gives you that space to constant. Literature is most process oriented. So, do you think this kind of differentiation between literature and film somewhere somewhere needs to be taken into consideration when we are dealing with film as resistance? Especially even if it's a film made by a studio, then it would be absolutely a finished product. But even if it's not made by a studio, Even then, a film is basically a finished product. How does that relate to resistance? Why literature would allow you that opening up, that processing? Fine. So maybe you would like to.
Yeah. Is there any other question? Or I could take all the questions together. Uh, you know what, Dr. Fatima, for me, boundaries are fluid. Somehow, for me, uh, you know, uh, one cannot stay in silos. B, boundaries are not closed, and nothing can ever be a finished product. And I'm going to now bring to you the fact that when it comes to, say, Shakespeare, now Shakespeare, or say the Sharat Chandra story Devadas. Now, yes, there is a finished product the moment there is one adaptation. But do you realize that that story is told and retold and told again and again on different registers? So there is this constant remaking, just as in a written text there are different kinds of interpretation. Similarly, on the cinematic register also there are interpretations and interpretations. Can you imagine a Devadas which was made much earlier in the 1960s, another Devadas which was made by Sanjay Leela Bansali, and the final Devadas that was on a very contemporary register made by Anurag Kashyap? So do you realize that newer and new interpretations and newer texts are written? And for me, therefore, the story of the film, or the film as a creative text and a creative art, is not frozen, is not fixed. Right. So if there is resistance, there is constant resistance. For example, the story of resistance, when it comes to the indigenous in cinema, is a continuous, kind of a story. And every time that you look at, for example, initial caricaturing and stereotypes of these indigenous people as savages and as dancing in leaves, and with little bones around their body, and with bone jewelry. So you see these kinds of stereotypes to real resistance, through, say, this kind of cinema. Right. So for me, it is not a finished product. Right, it's not a finished product, because there is another cinematic landscape, and there is another reworking, and with that reworking, another text is written. Right. I hope I've been able to answer your question.
Uh, may I ask one question?
Sure.
Do you think the contemporary cinema has attempted to demystify the power of myth with regard to moral values, and has been more into theorizing human tendency to various sorts of oppositional engagements of social facts?
There is
Like, for example, if you see the many diaspora novels with regard, for example, Mistress of Spices, or you may say another one. This is Chitra Devikurni's novels. If they are all means demystifying the power of myth, and if they are adapted into films, so when a viewer watches those films and that feel that there's some kind of oppositional impulses being depicted in the movies, so do you think that the effect or the impact of such kind of mental makeup affecting the different pattern or creating another sort of paradigm to social facts?
Is that Jayshree?
Yeah, I'm Jayshree.
Yeah. No, because I've not been able to see you here. Yeah.
Actually, my
Yeah.
camera has been technically by the operator turned off.
Okay, no
So,
problem at all. No
so
problem at all. Yeah.
hmm,
See, point is that I think I'm to come back to that question of hierarchy,
hmm,
which also Professor Joya raised. we don't have to actually get into the question of hierarchy, that what is important or what is more impactful or what is driving a particular message home, the text or the film. Point is that there are several aspects of a film, just as there are several aspects of a written text that we read. Similarly, a film is also read a differently, created differently. So it all depends on the filmmaker, how he interprets. And now I'm going to just kind of give you a real life example, say, of a text like Macbeth. Now, we all are familiar with these Shakespeare's tragedies. If you look at Macbeth and if you look at its transposition on cinema, say in 1957 by Akira Kurosawa, the Japanese filmmaker, it is on a very different Japanese register that he does it, right? Where it's a samurai story, and done in a very, very different way. And if we look at the Mumbai based Makbul that Vishal Bharadwaj creates, it is a story of the Mumbai gangland. It is a story of Abbaji. And, there are resonances with both. And I'm sure Macbeth has been, transposed on cinema. I don't know, in different languages and different geographical locations of this world. But I'm only talking of these two cultural transfers. So, I think it's unfair and unwise to compare in the sense that yes, there are resonances, so you do go back when you say, look at the script of Makbul and you read about the character of Macbeth and Lady Macbeth, and the way Taboo and Irfan Khan, how they created those characters. Yes, there are resonances, but I believe in what probably Kenneth Pellow said, that a new text is created. Every time there is a cinematic adaptation, a new text is created.
Right,
Right.
ma'am.
And yeah, so this I think is very important for us to take away whatever the filmmaker or the creator of the text is giving to us. And then we as receivers also take away what we wish to receive. Right. So, that way, of course, today there's a whole lot of emphasis on myth. Myths are created. Very soon you will see a Lord of the Rings. And I think, I don't know what all is being made into films. So probably all kind of mythological stories are also being made into films. Right. Okay.
Yes,
I
ma'am.
hope
Thank
I
you. Thank you, ma'am, for this wonderful interpretation and the session that you have given to us. By your grace, I think now we are wrapping up our program of today's session. We'll be soon meeting tomorrow at 6:15 with Professor Bertha's lecture on her ebook that she has got published, and she has, I think, the lecture on 16, 17 and 18 this week. So see you soon, all of you. Bye, good night. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Professor Jaya,
Thank
ma'am.
you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Bye, ma'am. Good night.
Thank you.